a black sat is either the last sat in a block or the sat before the next uncommon. It's almost like the shadow, the precursor, the foreshadowing of another sat coming very soon.
I've heard
which means
it's the harbinger.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, this is actually I might just leave this intro because that's like an open loop banger that now we're gonna come back to later in whatever we do here. But
Yeah,
for everyone listening, welcome back. This is another episode of the show that doesn't really have a name, tentatively called Bitcoin Weekly, or Bitcoiners talking about Bitcoin things, or Between Two Bitcoins. We're still trying to figure it out. And so yeah, we're just gonna chat with some people who I find interesting, that got good vibes, and also know some shit, and talk about Bitcoin for the next half hour 45. And we'll come back to black sats. That's actually super interesting. But I thought to start the conversation, we should talk
about like just really quick on the name. What about like an unpodcast? Because you know how Udi hates on podcasters everywhere all the time and says we have too many podcasters. So I'm just trying to think about what would Udi approve of here? Could it be an unpodcast?
My wife and I are huge fans of Dungeons and Dragons. That's actually how I know Cypher and Zero. And one of her favorite D&D podcasts is called Not Another D&D Podcast, because you got the same thing happening in like Dungeons and Dragons world. So you could not another Bitcoin podcast, or throwing that out there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yep, that one's good. Okay. Yeah, so first topic I got queued up. And it's been weird because like on Twitter, no one's discussing this topic. It's just like radio silence. It's only like the Bankless guys talking about it. But this ocean mining thing. So like I want to discuss this. It opened up a bunch of stuff for me where I've only been in Bitcoin for 2 years, so like I don't have a history of like deep diving into a bunch of these topics. But this idea of censorship and block templates and Bitcoin mining and all these things, I've had to like deep dive over the past weekend. And so before we get into the specifics, I wanna like level set, because I think a lot of this is coming down to like semantic disagreements or almost like moral arguments. And so I want to throw out my conception currently, and you guys kind of riff on like what you think of this. But like, it seems like the terms we use for censorship, filtering, and censorship resistance in a centralized world, like Google, for example, don't map to a decentralized world. And so I'll give my current thoughts on it. I think what they do on their node is filtering, because filtering by definition is like they can see the mempool and they can choose to filter what they want to put in those blocks, but they have access to that data. And then censorship is like a suppression of that. So on the local node, they're filtering, but then once it hits the chain, it kind of becomes censorship, because people sending transactions can't access the chain through their block template. And if they get enough hash rate, it is censored by definition. It's like my working conception. So censorship resistance is, even if they filter on the local node and censor once it's appended, there's other routes to get into the chain through other mining pools. So this is kind of my working conception. I hope I did it briefly, but hopefully it makes sense. But what's your guys' thoughts on like that, or like the semantic kind of argument, so we can kind of level set this discussion?
You were diving right in. I mean, you very little like explain what ocean pool is, which is fine. Get right into it. A bunch of other people have talked about what it is. Censorship resistant is a spectrum. One of the killer features of Stratum v2, which is the kind of core idea that ocean pool is built around, is the idea that the miner themselves can produce their own block. And that is one of the cool things, because that's not currently how it exists right now. The pool produces the block for you. You sell your hash. So in that line gets blurred, the difference between block production and hash producer gets a little bit blurred with Stratum v2. And so it opens up a different way to get around, the number of attack vectors for censorship that exists on Bitcoin and block production. So disclosure, I work for Luxor. We are a competitor, but there are some really smart people working on Ocean. We endorse Stratum v2 as a thing that is a cool cool tech, cool thing to integrate. And I like personally seeing more diversity in different strategies in the pools. We've been critical of some of the decision making and some of the branding particularly, but I'll toss it to Bob or Donny on the Jacob topic.
Do you want to go first, Bob? I don't know if I have as
sure.
Formed. Yeah.
I think from my perspective, I would call it all censorship. Filtering to me feels like censorship. If there is a single miner that wins all the blocks all the time, then they can censor you, and you cannot, unless you win your own block, you cannot put your data on Bitcoin because you cannot make the next block. And even though someone else can, it just means that you are censoring, and you're free as a miner, you're free to censor whatever transactions you want. There is an incentive to not censor because there might be high fee transactions, and you have a monetary incentive to not censor because you're going to lose out on some revenue if you do, like in the ordinals case. But to me, it just feels like censorship. If you're doing any filtering at all on transactions, it feels like censorship to me. And this is similar to how like rollups will work as well with sequencers. What sequencers can do as essentially the block producers, they collect all the transactions and then essentially send them off to a prover. A sequencer, this is the downside of centralized sequencers. And by, in parallel centralized mining pools, is that you do have a censorship resistance risk. And so if you can decentralize your sequencer in the rollup, lots of companies working right now on how you decentralize a sequencer to prevent this censorship. Similarly, on the Bitcoin side, the fact that you're able to, essentially produce your own block as a miner, I think also gives some nice decentralization so that a mining pool with a ton of hash rate can't define what this template looks like and define what gets included or excluded. It's a more decentralized process.
Donny, thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of them. So I'm probably the person who's been into Bitcoin the least long of all of us. So like my understanding of blockchain is reasonably good, and thorough, I guess, and my understanding of Bitcoin is less so, but it's all I've thought about for the last 10 months. So like, I know that's not a very long time, but it's a lot of hours dedicated to like obsessing over it.
It's like three years.
For a normal person, yeah, sure, because it's a full-time job for me.
It's 7 years in dog's life. 1 year.
My clock, my clock moves really slowly. I pack a lot of like obsession into a small amount of time. And the way I see this is I hear someone wants to censor transactions and I go, it doesn't matter because someone is going to, this whole thing is financially incentivizing fairness. That's the whole point of Bitcoin, right? Is to positively reward fair movements, unbiased movements. So like they can't just say, it's sort of like them deciding to purge this is where my misunderstanding of the concept comes in. When mempool.space says it's purging below 10 sats per vbyte, it's not, because a node has decided that it's not, even if it's just one node, right? So like you can decide whatever you want on a personal level, but the the organism at large is going to decide whatever is financially viable, right? So if there are transaction fees coming in, someone's going to eat them. It's just going to happen. It just has to. So it seems like a non-issue to me, and it feels to me like they're just taking a stance where I think philosophically, people fall in love with systems and humans and items for their own reasons. And as these systems, humans, and items evolve and turn into other things, they get mad about it because it's not the thing they thought it initially was. It still is the thing they think it is, but it also happens to be a lot more things than that. My big question is, what is pissing everyone off so much? Why are they so mad about this?
Yeah, dude,
how is that your identity?
That's
is that it?
We've got to argue about something. I'm pretty certain that if we stop arguing and debating, blocks are stop producing. There's somehow these are interlinked. The discourse, the Hegelian dialect, is baked into this ecosystem. It's just how we roll, man. I see it. Yeah. Like, look, it's a bunch of things coming to a head. You have this existing narrative of the hardcore maximalism, and it's kind of defined a lot of things about Bitcoin, and this would be one of the kind of implementations of a pool, which has a lot of things which are kind of considered like white whales of Bitcoin mining. The Lightning channel, adoption and payout structure, the Strata V2, which is a notorious thing. There's other pools which have tried to do it, which are currently doing it. My friend Alejandro launched a Strata V2 last week as well. And but this is like the kind of the big one, because Jack Dorsey's written the check. He's there, he's endorsing it. So it's a little bit of an ideological crucible where we get to see how this will actually play out. We've not really gotten to see what a real Strata V2 pool would look like implemented. Now, there's some other variables which I think may kind of muddy the waters, because like when Strata V2 was this white whale a year ago, this idea of any kind of transactions not being worthwhile on Bitcoin was not at all part of the conversation. So now we have this kind of interwoven into the conversation. It's like, well, I almost feel like it kind of distracts from the ability to provide what I call a control group for a Strata V2 pool. Because I just want to see a Strata V2 pool just do normal transaction ordering like the rest of us, and see how that works from a efficiency standpoint, from a attractiveness, from a payout structure. But there's a lot else going on here. I mean, they're running off Luke Dash Jr.'s NOTs config, which is wild. Wild to me that was not part of the like advertising or like kind of messaging, because it's an older version fork of Bitcoin Core that has some weird personality quirks to it. So a lot of interesting things happening right now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because like if they did a perfect product launch, you're just like, hi, I'm Luke, this is Jack, and we're launching the first Strata V2 pool, or one of the first, no one would care. Like, okay, cool, Strata V2 is finally here. It's been in production, or like in theory, for so long. So like taking the ideological stance definitely benefited them to like rally some troops and get some word out there.
Yeah, because we're a competitor and we're talking about it. So like it's kind of free advertising, right, which is why I'll probably let other people talk about it instead of magnifying it.
It works, it's especially in Twitter land. But one thing I'm curious about is like the underlying assumption here is that the economic incentives drive everything, and like the gold standard is high fees. It's almost treated as like law for sequencing. It's like you just take the highest. That's what's in the mempool. And for the most part, like if you do anything besides that, you're kind of doing some funky business, or you're being immoral, you're being stupid, you're gonna torpedo your pool, something along those lines. So it's not clear to me, like, what's the big benefit to Strata V2 and independent block construction if everyone's just doing sequential high fee anyways?
There's other things. It theoretically can reduce man-in-the-middle attacks. I had a list of other things. Man-in-the-middle attacks. Better job distribution, theoretically. Better CPU, lower CPU load. They claim bandwidth consumption, but I don't think in practice that's we see that it's better on bandwidth. Yeah, there's a lot of technical advantages you can argue that exist.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I'm wondering is like, because I forgot I was trying to find the startup's name, but they basically do like, they have a mock like database of the markets, and then they have people trade using some algorithm, and then if your algorithm wins, you get points in this leaderboard. So it's like a quant-based nerd contest about trading, and then if your algorithm wins enough times, you get pushed to like their real money market thing, and it gets to trade against with like real capital. So I could see something there where like maybe the current way of like high fees, there's some inefficiency there, and getting a bunch of crowdsourced nerds to like find white space and like other ways to make money we don't know them yet. We just think that high fee is the way, but maybe there's some unknown there. So you can't really have that market till you have Stratum V2. That's one benefit I could see.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other random things that I think only like the hardcore miners know, which kind of make me question whether they thought this through when they launched the pool. Like for example, there's this idea, the pool's gonna have trouble paying out more than 30 payouts from Coinbase. That's kind of the one of the big pitchy payouts to the miner from Coinbase. But actually, this runs into a structural hardware issue. Most Bitmain machines, I think, actually don't possess the hardware capacity to run. This is again more obscure, but I know that Bitmain machines can't really do more than 38 payouts from Coinbase. Some micro BT-West miners I think can, but like this is interesting because now we run into a weird incongruity with hardware doesn't actually support Stratum V2 scaling that much right now. So that's a very interesting phenomenon I think that we're going to see happen. Like if you're not one of the top 30 miners, and then when are you going to get your payout? That's my question.
One other interesting thing we could talk about here that's a little bit broader than just Ocean is just generally like MEV on Bitcoin with miners. Like I'm just waiting for some really forward-thinking miner to go and find some really lucrative first come, first serve drop that's happening or some token and just front run everyone with their own transactions. Because it's, totally possible to do something like that. And as the value of the ordinals and BRC20 ecosystems grow, there becomes the incentive to front run transactions increases to the point where you're doing your pool a disservice by not front running transactions. And I've talked with miners that are looking for additional revenue sources, trying to capitalize on this new ecosystem on Bitcoin, whether it's, partnering up with roll-ups to be reliable block producers, or whether it's, spinning off the uncommon SAT or even other SATs. Like maybe you start indexing for exotic and palindrome and pizza sats and whatever in your block. And I guess you wouldn't be anyway. So it's interesting to think about how that impacts miners moving forward.
Oh yeah, no. I think Robert from Ordinals Market floated this scenario. Bitcoin blocks normally 10 minutes between each one. I mean, occasionally we'll get an hour-long block. Imagine if that hour-long block hits. Let's say people are doing a lot of different activities on Bitcoin. There's a lot of mints. Let's just say whitelist Magic Eden mint or something, right? Let's say that becomes very popular and these are being whitelisted and then sold, and the sale value is incredibly high because these things happen all the time. We see shit moon in an hour. In that time period, in that delay, we could see miners now see the value of the block for value they capture out of band for like front running this whitelist mint. We could see that surpass in some cases the total value of the block reward. So in that case, you would like have the longer the block went on, depending on what was happening off chain, you could have a ramping up competitive block competition event. And I just think this scenario is inevitable. It may have already happened. We saw this kind of with our DGods block. We did the DGods mint and auction. I think we saw a little bit something like this, which looked kind of suspicious at the time, with an incredibly high fee rate block. And we saw what looked like an orphaned block or reorg. So this may have happened, and it's probably going to keep happening. The more that Bitcoin develops a personality to it, which is not exclusively financial transaction settlement.
Is that something that Stratum V2 does potentially fix?
It could put the control of that more in the hands of the individual hash producer, the miner, the data center operator, rather than removing it and having it be the software company layer. I don't know if it fixes that. I don't know how you fix that. I don't know if I think the first question is that a problem? So.
Got it. Because one of the benefits I heard to Stratum V2 is that If you have these out-of-band or partnership-based relationships where it's like, hey, I'm Coinbase, and I'm going to go to some miner who has X amount of hash rate, and I need to buy 10% of block space for some period of time, and I'm just going to shove stuff in there as needed, and you get consistent revenue. As Stratum V2 increases, that becomes less viable because you don't know if the individual miner is going to say, yes, cool, I'm down with the 10%. I'm going to put in my own stuff. And so as that increases, it makes that less consistent, and then that partnership breaks down. So that's interesting.
Although, conversely, as out-of-band revenue opportunities increase, there's now a disincentive to use Stratum V2. Because if you're not able to... this is a sticky subject because out-of-band revenue is interesting from a mining perspective. It's almost bad in many cases. But if there are lots of out-of-band revenue opportunities, now it's interesting. Like maybe you want a centralized mining pool so you can more effectively take advantage of these additional revenue opportunities. I don't know.
It is complex. There's a lot of different knobs that are being tweaked on Bitcoin right now, or people imagining and game theorizing this. It's funny because I have to ask myself, because I work for Pool, and part of me joining Luxor was because I wanted to be close to the block production, because it was very clear to me that we're entering into a very interesting era. So a lot of people don't know this, but I have some business partners, and we were one of the larger Ethereum miners out there for a very long time. And so just by proximity, I'm familiar with the business of MEV on ETH. And I just look at that and I say, it's going to probably, I think we'll see a lot of analogies and analogs on Bitcoin. It'll look different some ways, but then also like, we need to be looking at how Ethereum as an ecosystem has managed to keep producing blocks and having it be a relatively free and open network. So like, if you care about decentralization, we as Bitcoiners should not close our eyes and tunnel vision onto everything else is bad. There's nothing good happening on other blockchains. Like, no, there are some brilliant people who have solved some very, very complex problems. Not even solved, but they're actively working, and they've been running this race for years. So like, I want to invite those people to Bitcoin. There are some giant carrots that are being dangled right now, not by specific companies or offers, but like there's fertile ground for this type of activity. And then I hope that good actors would then see that Bitcoin is worth preserving as a neutral layer.
And then we think when we define good actor, we're not saying that like we like what's being validated. We're saying that what's being proposed is being validated. And I think that's worth noting, because we're not saying should. There is no should. There's not like this should be done and this shouldn't be done. It's like what ought to be validated is what has been proposed, right? In terms of transactions, like that's the point of Bitcoin. And if anyone decides, and I know that this is kind of like, my background is in philosophy, not in Bitcoin or mining or node running or anything like that. So like my brain always goes to what fundamentally makes Bitcoin is this feature, that it accepts anything anyone gives to it. That's the whole point of it. And if you take that away, if you make, let's say, for example, one mining company has decided that only the blocks they want have any validity, and that's what they're going to pass. That's what's going to happen. It's not Bitcoin anymore. You've just made your own independent company, and now it's going to be worth less because it's not Bitcoin. So like it feels like when somebody runs like a 51% attack or whatever can happen now that A6 exists, if you own Bitcoin, it's not Bitcoin. You have devalued that which you've stolen by stealing it. So what is the end game? That's my question. What is the end game with any of this? Why would someone want to steal something that loses its value because it's been stolen, right? Doesn't that enter into anybody else's head that it seems like a fool's errand to take this asset that's only valuable because no one owns it and try to own it?
That is the game theory of Bitcoin. That's the beauty of it. Why would you attack the thing you're most exposed to? So, the game
thereby
Bitcoin. You have to, in order to attack it, you almost certainly have to be deeply exposed to it. So you'd be shooting yourself in the foot. Is part of the Byzantine? It's integrated with the Byzantine generals problem and this idea of people act in self-interest largely. So, Yeah, man, I don't know. I'm kind of amazed we made it this far. Like, it's been 14, almost 15 years. You know, I never imagined at, you know, in my 30s, I'd still be talking about Bitcoin.
Same. And I just used to hear the word as a kid, you know, like I remember just hearing that Bitcoin existed, and then like somebody bought something with it, and I'd be like, oh, that's cute that you guys are interacting.
I'm
like
drinking milk,
digital
milk that I bought with Bitcoin. So, yeah.
You bought the. Wait, how did you do that? Did you pay $100 in fees to buy the milk? Or did you buy a large amount of groceries?
Our local Bitcoin meetup runs a little like raw milk distribution ring legally in Northeast Oklahoma, and we do it all. We transact in Lightning. We got a whole like truck that we coordinate back and forth between the ranch, and yeah. So
I'd also like to point out
and drink Bitcoin.
The difference between illegal and immoral. They're not even in the same sentence or paragraph or book. They're two totally different things. So even if it was an illegal milk ring, doesn't mean it's an immoral milk ring. And legal milk rings can be very immoral. Just want to say.
Oh no, yeah, we've checked all the I's and dotted all the T's, and no, we can distribute milk for Bitcoin.
Use case.
When we started this, I did not think we'd end up here, so props to you guys for sure.
Milk.
Before we switch topics, there's one more nuance about the like front running thing that I find is interesting, which is the pool that's probably done at least publicly the most, like, we'll call them fun things with their templates, is F2 pool, because I think they're pulling the uncommon sats already, and they are a stacks miner, and they're paying basically the dust limit to get the stacks Coinbase reward, which is very powerful for them. And what's weird about both of those is that they're annoying at first. Like, hey, they're taking their uncommons, now we're having less access to them. We gotta go searching through Coinbase, exchanges. And stacks people are like, they're messing up my yield. We're getting less Bitcoin spent. This is unfair. But once you realize you can't stop it, it turns into this is bullish. They're stacks miners. They're bullish on stacks. They're bullish on rare sats. And so I wonder if that same thing will happen with front running a collection where it's like, yep, they're bullish on the Gods V7 because they took half the collection and now it's super rare, whatever it is. Because once you can't stop it, you have to like kind of got to cope and be like, well, what do we do with this now? They're giving us validation at the mining level.
Yeah, I mean, I don't talk much about stacks, but you got to own stacks in order to do MEV on stacks. So your interests are aligned with stacks. It's kind of funny how that works.
It also, I think about like crazy things people do in terms of front running. Like, who was it that they're like is it Trickster? Is that their Twitter handle?
Yeah. Was that officially confirmed? It looked like it. I just couldn't like.
It really looked like it to me too, but I don't have any official confirmation. But anyway, speaking about these like out of band collaboration partnership opportunities, take someone that knows the ordinal space really, really well, that's very technically savvy, and just be friends with a miner. And whenever you're going to win a block, you just have like all of these opportunities like, hey, here's how much we can make if we do this. And then when you win a block, it's like, oh, an extra, couple $1,000s or whatever, like, why not? And so, yeah, I mean, interesting.
There's a lot of dynamic though in the kind of the business development front as also like public perception you have to consider, because this is a novel type of thing. I would say the stacks MEV that F2 pool is doing is fairly benign overall, and there's not really a whole lot of like substantial mining pools who have like signaled that they would actively do this. And just, I mean, speaking from experience, Bitcoin mining is just a different type of operator and person who builds and operates in the space, and is not really, that type of culture is not optimized for being super high touch and involved in the protocol and what I call like the Bitcoin layer itself. They've optimized for being like industrial infrastructure energy guys.
Yep.
And so like the transition and kind of marrying these two is going to be a little hard. because, we're all here. We live terminally online. We know what it's like. We're like, yeah, here's the incentive. Here's the carrot. It's dangling. Someone should get that. But there's a lot of different players here at the table, and that's what I like. The mining and block protection ecosystem on Bitcoin is very, very mature now, and in a way, it's kind of entrenched. So it's that when something is entrenched in crypto, we know that it's ripe for disruption.
Charlie, can you speak on anything you might be doing on the MEV side of Elixir?
We have talked all about cool things we could do. But the most probably, given that we also try to be a good actor, that's a delicate topic and situation. Yeah. And then, but as far, the one thing that we have seen a lot of demand for is our non-standard transactions. That's something we're actually actively exploring. For anyone who is interested, just open invite. If you want to do a transaction which would be outside of Bitcoin Core standardness, please reach out to me or our CEO, Nick. We want to know. We want to talk through it. This is a very interesting thing that where we're actively looking to try to integrate that type of thing. Yeah.
One example could be like a 4 megabyte block, for example. That's outside.
We've done a bunch of them, so we'd like to do more. We want to make sure we're doing it right. It's kind of systematized.
So could you give like a 60-second breakdown of why does non-standard not cause chain reorgs? It's a comment I've seen a few times because people just don't understand it.
Yeah.
Too. So yeah, why is that not the case?
Yeah. So think of it like a Venn diagram. But instead you have a big circle, which is Bitcoin consensus, and a smaller circle called Bitcoin Core standardness. And Bitcoin consensus is a little bit more permissible rules around what is a valid Bitcoin transaction of Bitcoin block, and the Bitcoin Core, which is the predominant implementation client, which effectively 100% of all nodes run Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin Core has a more strict rule set, generally security or spam or DDoS related. And so when something is outside Bitcoin Core standardness, it's in that kind of extra area with still within Bitcoin consensus. It's still a valid Bitcoin transaction. But if you are a normal person trying to get that transaction into a block, you would have a hard time sending it and finding its way through the gossip network of nodes to the mempool of a block producer or a Bitcoin miner, and then into a block. So to facilitate non-standard transactions, you would just have a transaction and you'd call us up and we just hand it to us and we include it in the block. That's the way, and that's the way the wizard was done. We're very transparent about that deal. And I think there's a lot of opportunity because when Casey launched Runes, right? Or rather when he put out the blog post, if you were to read and interpret what he wanted, it was initially going to be like, oh, this is all of the Rune deploy effectively would be a non-standard transactions. Nobody would ever be able to launch a Rune. I think now the actual spec out of it would still work. But the market is kind of throwing a lot of shit at the wall, and a lot of that will result in non-standard transaction demand. So that's a longer conversation, though.
Very cool. That'll be for a future episode of Between Two Bitcoins or Not Another Bitcoin podcast. Cool. Well, I want to switch hard left.
The SAT before the SAT. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
So we were talking about black sats earlier. Called the SAT before the SAT.
Yeah. Well, perfect segue, man. I got to give us props for talking for 34 minutes without dragging Ocean through the mud. So great job, guys. We kept a high-level professional conversation. But yeah, Charlie, you mentioned something about black sats and a pull request in ORD. Yeah, what is this? What is a black sat? I don't know any of this stuff really.
Dude, black sats are all the rage. They're super cool. So Casey threw out in his original blog post on ordinal theory back in 2022. It's here's ordinal theory, and here's an intuitive rarity scheme: the uncommons, rares, legendary, epic, whatever. So since then, a lot of people have come up with other rarity schemes. One of the cool ones is just instead of being the first sat of a block, you take the last sat of a block. And that was colloquially and kind of emergently given the term black sat. There's a couple of projects which have kind of marketed and launched around, and it's been adopted in marketplaces. So the specific PR on the org GitHub repo is, should we add black sats in, recognition into the client itself? And so that conversation just started, is ongoing. Bob had a really good take on this, which I'm gonna steal because that's a good line. What's you run it back, Bob. I like this angle.
Yeah, if you think about black sats, it's the last sat in a block, but it's also the sat right before the next uncommon to be mined. So there's actually an argument, if the next sat is an uncommon, that almost gives added value to the sat right before it. Even though it's not an uncommon, it's the black sat before an uncommon, which could be considered higher value. So I'm not convinced whether you go in the same block to the end to get the uncommon black, or whether you go back a sat to the previous block to get the uncommon. You could argue either direction, but essentially black sats become the harbinger, essentially, where it's like the black sat has come and the day is done, and we're gonna wake up and the sun's gonna rise on a new uncommon. So
I love that angle. That's so cool. Yeah. What's up, Donny?
I was going to say the idea of, so like, who makes rarity, right? Somebody wrote down, this is an interesting way to lay this out because we hadn't thought about it. Casey did this. He was like, check this out. If you apply serial numbers, here are algorithmic divisions in the way that these things are laid out in front of us, so we can say with certainty that this is the first. And first, number one is fun. And if your last name starts in AA, you usually get called first for the school lunch line, or last if they decide to flip it on you or something like that. And then maybe there is some value also to being the last called for lunch every time, because sometimes then you're the first, depending on how you look at it. But also there's always a second. There's always a fifth. There's always the 10th. It's a slippery slope, because if we start to add in a lot more rarities that are officially recognized by some authority, when do we stop adding those in? Because I don't know, my birthday sat exists out there. There's one of them. Who cares? That doesn't need to be put into or.io, but it can be. It could be if anyone cares. So I think this all just comes down to social consensus. If they become valuable enough and they want to be traded, and wallets need to begin to recognize them so that people don't spend them as gas, people will move to the wallets that recognize them, and then people will start using the explorers that recognize them. It seems to me like it's just a thing that's going to happen if people will it, and it won't if they don't. So if we all decide that the last sat and the first sat are both not equally valuable, but both important enough to put down on, let's say, even as a charm on ordinals.com, because that's a thing right now, charms, on-chain recognition of special attributes, right? That's cool.
He just hit like it was nothing.
What's that?
He just rattled it off like it was nothing. Right?
Yeah, that's a good line. Yeah.
So I don't know. It just seems to me like it's a slippery slope to begin to delineate the importance of everything, because if everything's important, nothing's important. And that's just a fact. If everyone's special, nobody's special, right? But it's all about vantage point. So if the collective that is using this ecosystem or this system decides that they want to use things that recognize this thing, then the thing should be recognized. And that's my take on black sats. I think they're cool. I think anything's cool if there's a narrative behind it. And that's one of the things I like the most about Bitcoin ordinals specifically. You can draw a vector in any X, Y, or Z axis through this and find importance for you or for your family or for your project, or, however you want to add additional versions of meaning. There's an on-chain way to do it. So if people use it and they think it's cool, then it ought to be recognized, as long as that doesn't get boycotted, something. Whatever people do when they want something not to happen.
I'm not too worried about market dilution for rarities, but I do think you bring up but Donny, your point about would everything special, nothing special, that is a good point, because
there's already a sat number.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's this is a conversation over, should the reference client of implementing ordinal theory, should it recognize additional rarities? That I think is a very good discussion. Because I my hot take is I don't think our ecosystem has really been able to discuss the nature of the client itself. Because it's just things have moved so fast. It's been a very chaotic development process. So at every step along the way, I like to be the one who like dangles a little, like yellow flag and say, everybody hold on, like this is really fun. This is really cool. Should it be in the client? What is the client and what is the protocol? This is a very blurry subject, and I don't think even Casey himself is sure of the difference sometimes.
Well, and it's especially because within Ordinals, the Ordinals GitHub repo, you have an Explorer and you have an inscribing functionality, and you have a front end to do different things, but you also have other wallet functionality, and you have the indexer. And there's an argument that we should like split these up in some fashion, keep the protocol indexer code like the clean, pristine, this is the thing. And then, like if they make changes to other things, like I know Casey's been building runes, but there's an argument that like maybe we don't want runes in Ordinals because for lots of reasons. And maybe people want the Ordinals Foundation or whatever they're calling it to just focus on protocol things and not on things at the application layer. Because they're really, really good at building at the protocol layer. But if they start building at the application layer, now they're competing with other teams in the ecosystem, then it gets kind of murky, like, we're donating to you and now you're competing with us. And like, I've seen these kinds of things at the blockchain level where a foundation might go and start building a lot at the application layer. And now all the developers are kind of upset because they're not working on the protocol, and you have people building on the protocol now that are relying on you for protocol improvements. Anyway, it's definitely a big mess.
It's so wild. It's only been 11 months. I mean, we saw this kind of thing happen in Bitcoin's history. Look up the history of the Bitcoin Foundation and kind of how it's interwoven through the history. Shout out BitMEX research of the BitMEX blog on the topic. I recommend everybody. And then I forget another guy, but I'll probably repost his blog on my Twitter in the next couple of days. But like, yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, I thought, oh, it's really super obvious, like what Bitcoin is, how this develops. These days, I just realize it's not. The governance and emergent consensus is so unbelievably confusing and blurry. And and now I think it's funny, maybe I should probably speak for all of us, like this is probably all of our first time participating this close to such an emergent, defining protocol from beginning to chain tip today. So, I mean, it's been a ride, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely like when you're in it, it's like super frustrating. People are dumb. Look at all these dumb takes. But then you realize like that's actually exactly how it's supposed to work because of how decentralized it is. Like, of course, there's jockeying for a position in politics and shit. Like that's literally required for it to work properly. So once you acknowledge that, it's like, okay, cool. Like, I still think you're an idiot, but you're doing your part on the opposite of me. So yeah, it's totally fine. Okay.
Everybody thinks somebody else is an idiot. There's no getting around that. I think on every topic, we're split 49-49 and then 2% don't care. So everyone is someone else's idiot, and we just have to embrace it.
Well said. Well said. Okay, we've been going for 43 minutes. Should we drop it here, or do you guys want? I'll leave it open floor if you want to do like one more topic or something you find interesting. I'll let you guys decide.
This has been really fun, but I do kind of like the high signal to noise. Like it's been a pretty good combo, so I don't want to force anything, but happy to continue it if there's another extra compelling.
I say cut it here. Tell people to tune in next week.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Also, okay, so let's end on some news. Bob,
can I also ask a question before we go?
Heck yes, you can.
And it's a question we can answer next time, but it's a question that Udi was trying to answer on a space last night that someone asked that I would like. My answer was different than everybody else's, and nobody really knew what the answer was going to be. And it was, who runs Bitcoin? And the multiple choice answer given, although there may be more of a multiple choice answer than this, was the miners the node runners or the participants in the system? And my brief answer was probably all of them. And somebody else's answer was the miners, somebody else's answer was the nodes, and they should be paid and all this. And there was like a good topic of debate because it's kind of unclear, I think, and maybe something to talk about next time.
Yeah, the answer is the most influential man in crypto, Casey Rotterdamore, according to CoinDesk. He runs Bitcoin now.
He does.
I am the captain.
Yeah.
All right, well, we don't have to talk about it next time then, as we know.
No, let's definitely push this next week because I have almost no thoughts and I have to think very deeply on this. But it's a very interesting topic.
I was going to argue participants in the network, so we'll bring it back next week.
Whatever that means.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Dude, yeah,
Okay,
Casey runs it. It's pretty obvious Casey's in charge. CoinDesk anointed him. They knighted him, and he now wears the crown of Bitcoin. So it's like being crowned prom king, but of Bitcoin. That's what he is.
He is the chaotic good that we need.
Yeah, he's so chaotic good.
Okay, then we'll call it there. Thanks, guys.